The message that came into the command post was almost impossible to believe, and the men who heard Puller's reaction to it remembered it for a long time because it told them something about their colonel and about the man the message was describing that no official record ever quite captured. The message was this: a battalion, a whole battalion, cold and depleted and exhausted like everyone else at Chosin, had left the road. In the dark, in the worst cold of the war, and gone up into the mountains on foot, off any track, over ground that no one moved a formation across, to try to reach a single Marine company that was surrounded and dying miles away on top of a frozen pass. And the battalion was commanded by a lieutenant colonel named Ray Davis. When Puller understood what Davis was doing, he did not say it was reckless. He did not say it could not be done, though by every ordinary measure it could not. What he said, and the men who were there carried the words, though the exact phrasing varies in the telling, was in the register of, if any man alive can get a battalion over those mountains in this cold, in the dark, it is that one. And then he said the thing that mattered more, the thing that showed you what Puller actually valued in a soldier. He said Davis was not doing it because it was possible. He was doing it because the alternative was leaving Fox Company to die, and that, to a man like Davis, was not an alternative at all. If you want more untold stories from the men who actually fought these wars, take a second and hit that subscribe button. Let me back up, because to understand what Davis was attempting and why Puller reacted the way he did, you have to understand three things: what Fox Company was, where it was, and what it would take to reach it. In late November of 1950, the 1st Marine Division was cut off around the Chosin Reservoir, strung out along a single mountain road, surrounded by a Chinese force many times its size, in cold that fell to 35 degrees below zero. That road was the division's lifeline, the only way out to the sea, and the whole survival of the division depended on keeping it open. And there was one place on that road that mattered more than almost any other. It was a high mountain pass called Toktong, and it sat between two pieces of the division that had to stay connected, between the Marines up at the far end near the reservoir and the Marines further south who held the way out. Whoever held Toktong Pass held the road. If the Chinese took it and kept it, the division was cut in two, and the northern half was finished. Holding that pass was a single reinforced rifle company, Fox Company 7th Marines, about 240 men, give or take, sent up to hold a piece of frozen high ground against whatever came, and to keep holding it no matter what, because if they let go, the road closed and thousands of men died. And what came was the better part of a Chinese regiment, maybe more. Fox Company was attacked the first night, and it did not break. It was attacked the second night, and it did not break. The Chinese came in waves, in the dark, in overwhelming numbers, and Fox Company held that hilltop through assault after assault, taking terrible casualties, running low on ammunition, with its wounded stacking up and freezing, and its perimeter shrinking, and no relief coming, because everyone else on that road was fighting for their own survival, and there was no one to send. For 5 days and 5 nights, Fox Company held Toktong Pass, cut off, surrounded, resupplied only by airdrops that sometimes landed in their lines and sometimes landed in the enemy's, freezing, bleeding, dying by inches on that hilltop, and holding because the captain commanding them, a man named Barber who was himself wounded and directing the defense from a stretcher, understood exactly what would happen to the division if they let go, and would not let go. That was the situation. Fox Company was holding the most important piece of ground in the whole breakout, and Fox Company was running out of men, out of ammunition, out of time. If someone did not reach them, they would be overrun, and the pass would fall, and the road would close, and the division would be cut in half in the coldest place on earth. Now, here's the thing. Everyone understood Fox Company had to be reached. That was not in question. The question was how, and the honest answer, by every normal measure, was that it could not be done, because the road to the pass was held by the enemy. You could not simply drive up it or march up it. The Chinese were on it and around it in force, and any relief that tried to go straight up the road would be fighting through a prepared enemy the whole way, and would arrive, if it arrived at all, too late and too weak to matter. The direct route was closed. And the indirect route, going around, going over, meant leaving the road entirely and moving a military formation across the mountains themselves, at night, in 35 below, over terrain that had no trails, no cover, no landmarks a man could navigate by, in conditions where simply lying down to rest for a few minutes meant death. Armies do not do that. It is not a tactic in any manual. You do not take a battalion off the road and send it cross-country over frozen mountains in the dark, because a formation that tries it comes apart. Men get separated in the blackness, lose direction, freeze, fall behind, and the unit that started as a battalion arrives, if it arrives, as a scattered handful of frozen stragglers who could not fight their way out of anything. That was the received wisdom, and the received wisdom was correct, for almost every commander who has ever lived. Here's what doesn't make it into the accounts. Someone did say it to Davis. In the shape the story has come down, a senior officer, the accounts differ on exactly who, told him plainly that what he was proposing was, in effect, suicide. That taking a battalion over those mountains at night in that cold was not a rescue. It was 2 units lost instead of 1. That he would lose his battalion in the dark and Fox Company would die anyway, and the road would still close. And that the sober, responsible, professional judgment was that it could not be done. And that judgment was not cowardice, and it was not stupidity. It was the correct reading of what a battalion can normally do. The officer who said it was protecting Davis's men from a march that attempted by an ordinary commander with ordinary men would have killed most of them for nothing. But Davis had done a different arithmetic. He had looked at the same impossibility everyone else was looking at, and he had come to a different conclusion. And the conclusion was this, that it was almost certainly impossible, and that Fox Company would certainly die if no one tried, and that between a near certain death for his battalion and a certain death for Fox Company, the only answer a man could live with was to attempt the near impossible thing. Stay with me, because what Davis actually did on that mountain, and what it cost him to do it, is one of the hardest feats of leadership in the whole war. He took his battalion off the road after dark, and he led it up into the mountains, on foot, over the frozen high ground, in the black cold, straight over terrain toward the pass. And the march became a thing that has almost no equal. There were no trails, there was no light. The cold was so severe that men who stopped moving died, so the column could not really stop, could not properly rest, had to keep moving through the entire night, or lose men to the cold itself. Davis navigated partly by compass, and partly by the stars, and partly by a kind of will that kept a mental map of where the pass had to be when everything a man could see was darkness and snow. Men fell asleep on their feet as they walked. Men who sat down had to be dragged up before the cold took them. The column strung out, and Davis moved up and down it in the dark, pulling it back together, keeping it a battalion when everything about the night was trying to scatter it into frozen individuals. He himself, the accounts say, was nearly incoherent with exhaustion and cold by parts of that night, and kept going anyway, kept the direction anyway, kept the battalion together anyway, because he understood that the moment he stopped holding it together, it would come apart, and Fox Company would die. He was doing the thing everyone said was impossible, and he was doing it not because he had found some trick that made it possible, but because he had decided that impossible was not the same as optional when men were dying at the end of the march. And this is where it gets complicated, because on paper Davis was doing exactly the reckless thing the senior officer had warned against. He had taken a battalion off the road, into the mountains, at night, in killing cold. By the received wisdom, he should have lost it. By the received wisdom, he was throwing away his own command in a doomed gesture. Except that he did not lose it. He held it together, mile by frozen mile, through a night that should have scattered it, and he brought it over the mountains, and in the darkness before dawn his battalion came down onto Toktong Pass from a direction the Chinese did not expect, and it reached Fox Company. Fox Company, which had held for 5 days and 5 nights, which was down to a fraction of its strength, which was very nearly at the end, was reached. The pass was held, the road stayed open, and the northern half of the division, which would have been cut off and destroyed if Toktong had fallen, kept its way out. See, what most people miss about this story is that they think it is about doing the impossible, about a heroic commander who pulled off a thing that could not be done. It is about something more precise than that. It is about the difference between two kinds of impossible, and about a specific quality that lets a certain rare man tell them apart when everyone around him cannot. Because the senior officer was right. It was, in the ordinary sense, impossible. A battalion cannot normally cross those mountains in that cold at night and arrive as a fighting force. That was a true statement about the average case, about what most units led by most commanders would do. If the received wisdom had been wrong in general, it would not have been wisdom. What Davis understood, and what Puller recognized in him from a distance, which is why he said what he said, is that impossible is a statement about the average, and that leadership is precisely the art of not being average at the moment it matters most. The march was impossible for a battalion that came apart in the dark. It was not impossible for a battalion that did not come apart, and whether it came apart or not was not a fact about the mountain. It was a fact about the man leading it up the mountain, and whether he had the will and the skill and the sheer refusal to keep a freezing, exhausted formation together through a night designed to scatter it. The impossibility was real. Davis did not deny it. He simply understood that it was conditional, that it was impossible unless a man made it possible by force of leadership, and he made himself into that condition. He did not find a way around the impossibility. He became the thing that the impossibility had not accounted for. That is what Puller saw from the command post when the message came in. He did not say it was reckless because he understood, as few men could, the difference between recklessness and a correct reading of a conditional impossibility by a man capable of resolving it in the right direction. He knew Davis. He knew what that specific man could hold together with his own will. And so where a lesser observer would have seen a battalion being thrown away, Puller saw the one kind of man who could actually get it over those mountains, doing the one thing that could save Fox Company, for the one reason that made it non-negotiable. That leaving them to die was, to a man like that, simply not on the list of things he was willing to do. And there is a reason this reaches past that frozen pass, into ordinary life, into work and families, and every place where people face a wall and are told it cannot be climbed. Because most of the time, the people telling you a thing is impossible are right about the average, and wrong about you, or wrong about you only if you are willing to become the exception, which is not free, and which most people, understandably, are not willing to pay for. Davis's mountain is a picture of the rare moment when the impossible thing is also the necessary thing, when someone at the end of the march will die if no one attempts it, and when the whole question comes down to whether one person is willing to become the condition that makes the impossible possible, knowing it might cost them everything, and doing it anyway, because the alternative is unlivable. Ray Davis received the Medal of Honor for that march and the fighting around it. He went on to become a 4-star general, but the thing that Puller named that night in the command post was not the future general or the medal. It was the quality itself, visible already on that mountain, the willingness to look at a true impossibility and a certain death at the end of it if no one moved, and to decide that the impossibility was the smaller problem. Fox Company came off that hill because a battalion crossed the mountains to reach it, and the battalion crossed the mountains because the man leading it had decided that it cannot be done, and it will not be done by me, were two completely different sentences, and that only the first one was true. So, was Davis right to do it? To take a battalion over the mountains at night, in that cold, against the sober professional judgment that it was suicide? Some would say the senior officer had it right, and Davis got lucky. That the responsible judgment really was that it could not be done, that Davis gambled a battalion on a near impossibility and happened to win, and that a leader who bets his command on beating the odds is, most of the time, going to lose it. And that we remember Davis only because he is the rare survivor of a bet that killed 100 other commanders we never hear about. Others would say that this misunderstands what Davis actually did, that he did not gamble on luck but on his own capacity to make the impossible thing possible, by leading it that way, that he correctly read a conditional impossibility and correctly judged himself the man who could resolve it. and that Fox Company and half the division are alive because one man understood that impossible for the average is not the same as impossible for me tonight. Let us know where you land in the comments below. And if you want more untold stories from the men who actually fought these wars, make sure you subscribe.